which the army says, okay, we don't need to do all that. We can do something less. We don't have to deport the person. We can put him in administrative detention. We don't have to take the whole land. We'll take only some or not. We don't have to destroy the house. We can just seal off the room where that person lived or part of the house. And in return for that, the petitioner withdraws the petition. And so all three sides gain something, because the High Court is saved from writing another decision either with the occupation, which most of the judges don't like to do, or against the occupation, which is pretty impossible to do, and this is what gets the court into trouble with the political system. The political system is trying to diminish the power of the court constantly. The petitioner, anyway, didn't petition to the High Court of Justice of Israel because he believes in Israeli justice or in the Israeli system. It was just a tool to gain something, and if he can save some of his interest, then that would be good. And the army doesn't really care about this specific decision, but the precedent, the bad precedent, would be more worrying. So when you look at it from the point of view, some of you are lawyers. I'm sure that it's High Court of Justice is not supposed to moderate deals. It's supposed to say if something is legal or illegal. But if you look at it from a practical point of view of how the occupation developed, there were forces in Israel that really wanted to go much further all the time and still want to go. And this pressure of the court sort of pushes back on that all the time and does regulate, not in a formal way, but it does make it harder for the occupation. So for instance, I said before that the High Court of Justice did not strike down primitive house demolition. But until the mid-80s, the way it would work, and this is hundreds of cases, let's say a Molotov cocktail would be thrown and cause an injury. I don't think there was a case of fatality, but cause damage to Israeli lives or to Palestinian collaborator lives. Then this was the case for house demolition. And until the mid-80s, 20 years into the occupation, the practice was the general security got intelligence, got information that they were fine with, and they thought that it's sufficient, that this is the person who did it. They would come, demolish the house, no questions asked, immediately. Then the person would also be, the person would be arrested, and there would be a trial. Perhaps the house demolition would take place only after his confession, but that's the way it was in the beginning. In the mid-80s, the High Court of Justice started moving into the subject. It refused to rule on it, but it said this is such a dramatic, irreversible measure that you have to give people, the army has to give people a chance for a hearing. So the people who got a demolition order, your house is going to be demolished in 72 hours, would go to a military commission and say, we don't agree to this. You don't have a reason to do this. And the military commission would have to review it. It would take a bit of time. And then if the military commission's decision was to demolish the house, they would go to the High Court of Justice, which supervises the military commission. So, and these processes got more and more lengthy, and finally, to a certain point, it reached that there was a year and a half of legal proceedings before the house would actually be demolished, and by that time, no one even remembered why the house was being demolished. And these are years that the media became more and more active, the world media and Israeli media, and these were just bad images. So the army began to get tired of the practice, a lot because of the friction that the legal system put on it without ruling. So this is the kind of thing that it's a dichotomy that is, there's no bottom line. Why did we do it like this? Why did we both have this occupation? It's moving forward and forward, and also put in a mechanism that slows it down and actually doesn't let it be free. But this is something I learned.
The second part, question about the Israeli reaction.
Reactions. The gatekeepers changed. The gatekeepers sort of created a public discussion, which sort of finished the public discussion that was around this film, this film came out about a year and a half before that, and the reaction was very strong. I was afraid that it was a film that was going to disappear because it's about a specific dry issue and who's going to be able to debate it. But it had hundreds of screenings, and the reactions were polarized, but strong. And I think it was. There were a few reasons for it. I mean, when I said that the reactions are strong, I mean, for me the most moving reactions are reactions from the public, of course, but also from the people who, not necessarily from the legal system, but from, I remember, I always quote this, I remember one email that I got pretty early on from a woman who works in the Ministry of Justice, and she said that since she saw the film, she's imagining the film that will be made in 10 years, and she's sitting there in front of a green screen and explaining what she's taking to court tomorrow morning, and she's disturbed. And I think what the film did with this, this other camera that looks from the side suddenly of the whole thing, this other angle, is that at least for a moment, many people sort of imagined the work that they were doing, which was not work that was public, but they suddenly imagined this outside eye looking at it. And that created, in different directions, a lot of discussion.
First of all, I want to compliment you. Amazing film. I was, first of all, one of the things that I was thinking of, and was quite shocked actually by, was the thing that I got, that the judges you interviewed, or at least some of them, weren't aware at all of the historic and the moral implications of their work, which I think is quite shocking, especially when you talk with someone like Judge Shamgar or Judge Ashno or the others about the issue of the Mawat land, about these small decisions, right, and their implications. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and also just a general question, out of curiosity, what sparked your interest in this to begin with, in this topic to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that there are a lot of things. I mean, the more questions you ask, the more criticisms about the film I'll have to bring up. But one of the criticisms is that this whole perspective of looking at the legal work in this perspective, with the historical perspective or with the perspective of justice, it's true that I didn't bring the word justice into the conversation. I mean, I had it in mind, but they bring it, they talk about it. They, by the way, talk about occupation, where in some circles in Israeli society, growing circles, the word occupation is not agreed on, but they talk about it. But looking at it with hindsight and looking at it in the perspective of justice and the perspective of the historical development is something that is one of these mirrors that I said that I got after making the film. They feel that it's not fair to look at it like that, some of them. And what I take from this is something that is good for me, I guess good for other people. You can never know. I mean, a film like this, I'm always thinking about the films that I made. Like when I look at them 10 years afterwards, what will I think of what I thought, or what would I think of what I wanted to tell people when things change? And I'm not sure that I will always be able to defend the point of views that I have at each specific time. And I think for them, one idea was that the work that they were doing was not political. And this is again, this has developed when I'm currently building a website in which we expand all these subjects and we show much more of what these people said outside of the film. And then you can see how the frame of mind changes over time. In the beginning, when Shamgar wrote these rules, and when we entered entered the West Bank and these people had to implement the law, they were really, like their master was international law. They did it. There were things in the original material. For instance, there was a paragraph that said very clearly, it's paragraph 35 of the first, of the order security regulation. Paragraph 35 said, in this case, follow Geneva Convention rules, and in case of a conflict between the situation and between Geneva prevailed. And so you can see where they were. A few months afterward, the reality started changing. Suddenly, it was still temporary, but Israel didn't suddenly want to define so clearly that it's an occupation. So you can see that the order is rewritten a few months after the occupation, and that clause, those clauses with Geneva Convention are removed, and instead some other clauses referring to something else is inserted. And this was because suddenly the legal work was not being done only to uphold international law, but also to uphold the government, which said, okay, we don't know yet where we're going with this. There was a lot of theoretical thinking. Some of you surely know that suddenly we said, you know, this is not exactly occupied territory, because we actually occupied the territory. True, we entered in war and we took it, but who did we take it from? We took it from Jordanians. The Jordanians that actually entered in 48 into the territory that was supposed to be the Palestinian state that never came to be. So they are occupiers too. So Geneva talks about when you occupy land from legal sovereign. Maybe all of you know this, but so the legal work began to start serving something else. You jump in time 10 years forward and you have Attorney Alexandrowicz, who gave a very candid interview and said, yeah, Sharon came to me, he said, I need a solution. At that time, Sharon was already much more important than international law. International law is becoming more and more of an obstacle that we sort of have to deal with because we are dealing with the world, but it's not a value as it was in the beginning. So basically, I think the shock was for them that this change of perspective, that it's not about doing your work in what you feel is in an apolitical way, but suddenly someone comes and judges it politically and morally. And yes, there's not a lot of reflection. I have a couple of more things in the material outside, but most of them were not reflective about this. I mean, in a way, they're body languages, but in text, they are precisely, this is what needed to be done, this is what we did, and we think that it's okay. And there's always some of the reaction that I get in Israel, and is founded, is like people come and say to me, okay, so what do you prefer? Do you prefer the Syrian model? Do you prefer the Egyptian model? But this is not the, I mean, in most things, this is not the standard that we judge ourselves by. So regarding the second question, do we have more time?
Until 10.
Feel free to, I'll speak as long as people have questions, and feel free. How did I get into it? There are two issues. I can see. I mean, I know this one stems from two periods in my life. First of all, like all Israeli men, I've served in the military, like most Israeli men, and I did it in my regular service was in the period that's portrayed here in the film, the First Intifada. So it was basically a lot of the time was spent at the West Bank. It's actually more police type of service because it was trying to fight this that uprising, which was really a popular uprising in today's standards. So the law was there. I mean, Israeli men who do their army service are children, but we don't think deeply about issues. But the law was definitely there. You would get a military lawyer would come in and explain something that you forgot immediately about international law, but you would get that lecture, and